Our first speaker today let me know earlier today that she would be late. So Kat Grant is not here. So the person evaluating Kat Grant can sit back and relax unless she comes in a little later. That means Artie Buss is going to be our first speaker today, delivering his speech number 4, a 5 to 7 minute speech entitled, Don't Ask. Please welcome Artie Buss.
How can we get information from another person unless we ask a question? Well, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests, today I'm going to advance the thesis that when you have a question, don't ask. I'm going to talk about how questions can be entrapping, both in the public arena as well as the personal arena. I'm going to talk about the different ways in which we respond to these entrapping questions, and then I'm going to show you some ways that we can get our information and still not ask. A question can be innocuous, but it can also be very entrapping. For example, in the 2000 primary for South Carolina for the Republican presidential nomination, voters were called up and asked this question: would you be more or less likely to vote for John McCain for president if you knew he had fathered an illegitimate black child? That's what's known as a push polling. And that's obviously an entrapping question, kind of like, how long have you been beating your wife? It's clear to see that these are questions that have a little agenda to them, more than a little in many cases. But did you realize that in many other cases, when we ask a partner or even a friend what may seem like an innocent question, it may be perceived and received as something which is not okay and doesn't feel well. We may often have an agenda behind that, or our agenda may be unclear. So questions like, are you going to eat that? Are you going to wear that? Are you going to wear that? Or, of course, my favorite, does this make me look fat? Now, some questions are innocuous, like, what's your birthday? What's your favorite dessert? What's your sign? How old are you? Getting into some hairy areas there. But other questions can be very entrapping. Some are complete traps. Anything that starts with, why don't you, or why did, is bound to be a trap. Right, now why is that? Because when we hear questions like that, that takes us back to our childhood. And when we were a child, we often had to be standing in front of a parent or a teacher or some other figure of authority being scolded. And often when we were scolded, we were being asked, now if your friend Jimmy jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? Or now why did you do that? So whenever we hear a question that starts with why, we go back to that place of childhood. And it's almost like we're a small child again. So and it's not a teacher, it's not a parent, it's our beloved partner, our dear friend. And yet we unconsciously go back there. So to be sagacious about getting the information that you want when you're asking a question, understand that that may be going on for the other person. When you ask what may seem like an innocent question to you, are you going to eat that? That may seem like a very entrapping question to them. And I'll address what we can do about that. The other thing is that being in a child relationship with someone else, they kind of tends to be in a parent one. And that's a kind of a dysfunctional relationship. If we're in an equal partnership, then we want to be equal. We want to be heart to heart. We want to be in our aware self. And we don't want to be a parent to their child either. So if I ask someone about an informational question, then they'll often have to go to your head in order to find the answer. And your head is the place of ego and judgment and parentalness. So if you ask that, then that tends to put that other person in that place. So how can you ask a question and get the information that you need and not ask a question? Well, the first is don't ask. But if you can't ask, what can you do? You can tell. Every question can be turned into a statement that does not sound threatening. And second, when you have an agenda, or at least a reason for asking, begin your question with that reason. Explain why. Here's why that's important. One day, 10-year-old Tommy comes home from school, says to his dad, "Dad, where do I come from?" Now's the time for that sit-down talk between father and son. He sits down, little Tommy, and he talks about the birds, and he talks about the bees, and he talks about all the things that go on to make a baby. And at the end, Tommy's eyes are as wide as saucers. He says, "Johnny down the street comes from Cleveland. Where do I come from?" So before you ask a question, explain the intent of the question. If little Tommy had had this skill, then an uncomfortable interchange might have been avoided. So why are you asking? So first, turn a question into a statement. Bless you. So instead of saying, "What happened?" say, "Something happened." You feel the difference between the two? If you're going to say, "Are you going to wear that?" Well, why are you saying that? It might be, "Are you going to wear that? I really like that outfit on you, and I appreciate you wearing it." Or it might be, "You know, the event that we're attending tonight is an opera, and I'm a little confused as to why blue jeans are being worn." Or, "The event we're going to is a hoedown, and I'm a little confused by the tuxedo." Now, did you notice how all the questions were phrased as a statement? So when you don't ask, then you don't send the person to their child, you don't send them to their parent, you keep them basically here. They're not so defensive. So in an earlier speech, I talked about how to respond to questions, but now I've told you how to ask a question. Never ask a question. Explain why you want to know the information and phrase it as a statement. So don't ask. Madam Toastmaster.